Among the items added to the budget by Senate Republicans was a proposal that would require Medicaid to essentially redo its procurement process for the managed care plans that want to work with the state. The amendment would require the process to examine whether applicants are Ohio-based, the number of jobs created or lost with the state's awarding of a contract, other economic factors, and whether the managed care organization has a record of quality services and customer satisfaction. Advocates have said that will cause major problems and delays, especially in the new OhioRISE program. The $1 billion OhioRISE program is aimed at coordinating care for kids with complex and expensive mental and behavioral health issues while keeping families intact during treatment. Lauren Anthus with the Center for Community Solutions has deep experience with Ohio Medicaid.
So the OhioRISE program is an answer to a decades-long problem that we have in Ohio in regards to coordinating care and providing services for children with medically complex needs. In particular, this is a response to some of the work that's been ongoing in the last few years around what we call multi-system youth, essentially children and adolescents who may be engaged in multiple systems, whether that's the developmental disability system or the correction system, the behavioral health system, so on and so forth. Oftentimes, parents and families have to relinquish custody to the state, literally hand their children over to the state in order to receive some basic services. So OhioRISE was created as a continuation of the work to better coordinate services and care for children and families who have these complex needs and to end custody relinquishment in the state of Ohio. The state budget then inserted these amendments essentially, which would derail that effort and all efforts really related to recent reforms in the Medicaid program, including reforms around pharmacy benefit management, because it would essentially mandate that the Ohio Department of Medicaid rebid its contracts with managed care. The challenge is that all of these different reforms are interlinked. So it'd be like taking a gear out of a clock and expecting it to read the right time. It just does not work.
So when the Senate budget passed, there was an amendment that would take OhioRISE out of this. But you're saying that because there is this interconnection, just doing that won't work, like you just said.
Yeah, it's not going to work. And the reason why is a lot of the functions that we are talking about here in terms of the Medicaid program used to be within one procurement or one contract with these mega contractors, right? A Medicaid, like a third of all the money that we budget in the state of Ohio flows through these contractors. And we used to have pharmacy benefit management, for example, happen within the single contract. And what the General Assembly said is, well, we don't like spread pricing, right? We don't like the pharmacy middlemaning. It's costing us a lot of money. We're not getting the right bang for our buck. So we would like you to change that system. And thus we have now a single pharmacy benefit management program. That is also managed care. The administrative simplification for providers to be able to credential at one place, to bill at one place, that is also a managed care product. And all of these managed care efforts are really threaded together. They are interwoven. And so the operational, financial, and policy and legal construction of these contracts are intermingled. So if you don't have one part of it, right, if you don't have this general procurement that says thou shalt do the following in regards to OhioRISE or in regards to pharmacy benefit management, then you have to renegotiate all those other contracts. And there's been years worth of development in this with extensive public input over a large amount of time. The General Assembly has mandated some of these reforms to take place. So it really just sort of throws a grenade into all those reform efforts.
And there are real families and real kids in this program who need help, up to 60,000 of them. Mark Butler of Columbus is the father of 23-year-old Andrew, who was diagnosed with autism as a toddler, but also has a severe intellectual disability, several mental illnesses, and he's nonverbal. And as he became a teen, he also became violent. Andrew was admitted to Cincinnati Children's Hospital a few years ago. And when it was time to discharge him, the Butlers were told it was too dangerous for Andrew and for the rest of the family for him to go home. Mark Butler thought Medicaid and private insurance would cover the costs of residential treatment, but they didn't. So he and his wife surrendered custody of their youngest son to get him the residential treatment that he needed.
He was sent to a facility in near Ironton, Ohio, which from Columbus is a pretty big journey through a lot of hilly roads. But my wife and I made a commitment that we would go and see him every weekend. And the reason for that is when you have a kid who's nonverbal, he doesn't understand Skype or Zoom, he can't read or write. The only way to have a relationship with him is to just be close to him. And that was taken away from us when he was sent someplace so far away. Now, we're lucky he was a boy. A lot of girls are sent out of state to receive their treatments. That first weekend we drove there, and they told us, you know what, we don't think he's ready to see you, so you're not allowed to see him. And so my wife and I just spent the day in the car looking at the building, just holding each other and crying, just because we just wanted to be close. You know, that's what we wanted. And after that, we visited every single weekend, 25,000 miles, longer than the circumference of the earth, until eventually we were able to have custody returned to us. We were able to get him back up into our community. And the thing is, the treatment worked. That experience was effective. We went from having 10 to 20 very violent outbursts at home to, my goodness, in the past 7 years, we've had 3. So it worked. But when I made that call to Children's Services, it was the hardest call I ever had to make in my whole life. Because we didn't want to surrender custody. We just wanted him to get help. And if he had leukemia, we wouldn't have had to go through that, certainly. And I when I hung up the phone, I remember saying, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, this feeling. And I promised that I would do everything I could to make sure other parents didn't have to do that.
The Butler situation is more stable now. Andrew lives a few minutes away from his family and sees his parents every weekend. But things are desperate for Lisa Norris of Columbus. She says her 12-year-old daughter, Hannah, one of her 5 kids, 3 of whom are foster children, is bubbly, artistic, athletic, and funny, but experienced significant trauma in her first years of life before she and her brother were adopted by the Norris family. Lisa says Hannah has been in what she calls a constant cycle of aggression over the last year during the pandemic and ran into the same problem that Mark Butler had. Medicaid and private insurance wouldn't cover the $15,000 a month that they would have to pay up front for Hannah's residential treatment. Lisa found some local funding and money that was in the last operating budget for multi-system youth, but it only lasted 6 months.
She was making progress, but we ran out of funding and she had to be sent home, cold turkey. That transition was horrendous, and our behavior has escalated worse. Because again, with a child with reactive attachment disorder, every change you make makes it worse. Because that's just proving to them that nothing is stable and no one's coming for them and nothing's being taken care of. But we came into this, we begged county systems. I'm fighting 2 agencies whose sole purpose is to help protect families and children, and they don't have the resources either. And the only, so it came down to 3 weeks ago, the 11th of this month, we were forced to go to court and beg a judge to temporarily give custody to the county because they do have the funding to fund her residential placement, but there's no mechanism in place for them to pay that same tab and allow her to remain in my custody. What has resulted since then in that desperate attempt to keep not only her and my other 3 children in my home physically safe, because if anything happens to the other 3 kids in my home, then I'm charged also. When I went to the county with begging for help, please, I need more hands in my home. I need more help. I'm trained in restraints 10 years over. I can't safely restrain a 135-pound kid by myself. They don't do it that way even at the hospital. It's a multi-person restraint. They have injectable sedatives. They have safe rooms. I can't legally even contain her in a room. If I bar a door or lock a door, I'm being charged. So there's no way to keep her safe in the home. As a treatment parent, foster parent, I've had caseworkers in my house for years. They've even said, you've done everything you absolutely can. Your house is like psych ward level safety. There's nothing more you can do in your home short of adding more hands, adding more therapists, and we don't have the funding for that. So when we turned over custody in an attempt to get that residential placement, we have the recommendations. We have multiple professionals in writing saying this is what she needs to stand her best chance at being healthy and safe. Turned her over to the county. The county is designed as a system for triaging abused and neglected children. So my daughter went into that system. She's not an abused or neglected child. She's a mentally ill child. So their mode of operandus is put her in the least restrictive placement, which for them, the first night was a homeless shelter. So she spent her first night at the teen homeless shelter locally and was transported to Children's within 24 hours after another suicide attempt. She has then been bounced to 3 other placements since then. She is still not in a residential facility today. She still has no new therapy or treatment put in place today, 3 weeks later. And all we're doing is adding more years and more trauma to my daughter and my family that we will eventually, hopefully, get this funding thing fixed and get her back home that we'll have to triage.
Lisa Norris says the funding for multi-system youth like her daughter Hannah and Mark's son Andrew needs to be addressed. And she says the OhioRISE program will help. But if it's delayed through a requirement of a new Medicaid procurement process, she says it will be devastating for her family.
We can't afford to wait. For Hannah especially, it literally means the difference between her life and death. 6 months down the road, my child might not be alive in this system. We can't keep her safe without the funding. And not only is that absolutely soul-crushing to stand by and feel so helpless while we have the treatment. It's right there behind the glass door. We have the treatment to be able to help her. We don't have the money. It makes a huge difference for our family and my little girl. But we're also looking at a 12-year-old little girl who is 6 years away from adulthood. And as a parent and a community member and an educator, I also look at this and go, my God, if she turns 18 and we've done nothing else but bounce her through the system, what are we sending out into the community? We're going to have a very troubled adult. And then it becomes everybody's family that should be concerned. I'm doing everything I humanly can to head that off for her benefit, for our family's benefit, for everyone's benefit. We just need some help.
The redo of the Medicaid procurement process was added into the budget by Senate President Matt Huffman of Lima and Senator Teresa Gavarone of Bowling Green, both from Northwest Ohio. And it comes after a Northwest Ohio provider that was not chosen by Ohio Medicaid in the competitive bidding process raised questions. Paramount Healthcare, owned by ProMedica, said in a statement that not being included will, quote, needlessly disrupt care coordination and support for nearly 250,000 Ohio adults and children who are enrolled in Medicaid. Further, the decision will result in over 600 lost jobs in Ohio and economic losses estimated at $81 million annually for the state.
This is an anti-competitive proposal. The particular individual insurance company that has been promoting this has been citing things like jobs and economic impact. The reality is, first of all, we want a cost-efficient, effective Medicaid program, and we don't do very well, right? We're ranked 47th out of 50 states in regards to value. We consistently underperform in terms of children's health care, in terms of the management of chronic disease. And as someone who regularly engages policymakers, the biggest question is, how do we save money in Medicaid? Well, competition is part of that equation. Most of Medicaid is actually managed by these private contractors and is a matter of contract and performance behind that contract. So we're essentially guaranteeing that underperformers are insured to do business with the state of Ohio without achieving anything for that money. The other thing to pay attention to here is, in regards to those plans that were awarded, there are new companies coming into Ohio, and that means a couple of things. Number one, it increases competition. This is why the Buckeye Institute, for example, is taking the same position we are. It increases competition, which can help lower prices, but also it's likely going to create more jobs. But I find it sort of interesting because this is the first time I've ever heard a desire for Medicaid to directly create jobs rather than require Medicaid beneficiaries to engage in work requirements. And the new contract, for example, does a lot more in terms of employment training and that sort of thing. So why don't we just expect more out of these contractors rather than guarantee the business of Ohio taxpayer money be guaranteed to one or two vendors?
Ohio Medicaid informed Paramount last week that its appeal to reconsider its application was rejected. In its letter, Ohio Medicaid wrote that Paramount only made reference to OhioRISE 17 times in its application, while the top applicant, Humana, referenced OhioRISE 94 times. The second place applicant, Aetna, referenced OhioRISE 91 times. The letter says, in part, Paramount does not appear to fully grasp or otherwise has decided not to embrace the vision for the future of the program. Paramount President Lori Johnston told the Toledo Blade a few days later when asked about OhioRISE, It is a very unique population, and we support the program and having them have their own program. But it is no longer part of what we would be responsible for. It is their own program and not what our procurement was about. I guess in hindsight, we should have thrown that buzzword out a few times. I don't think the number of times we used OhioRISE should be indicative of our approach and understanding of that plan. We support the program and are very committed to seeing the program is successful with that population. That incensed advocates, and especially some OhioRISE families, who responded on social media by sharing photos of their kids with the hashtag not a buzzword.
When I have heard folks say, especially the folks who are trying to fight this procurement, say, oh yeah, we support OhioRISE, it's a special population that needs the help, and maybe we didn't get the contract because we just didn't use the buzzword. That is super offensive to me, who has been working on this for a long time. It's offensive to parents who are experiencing trauma right now, because OhioRISE isn't a buzzword. It represents the change we've been fighting for, and if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
The money in the last budget helped parents of 469 children to avoid having to turn over custody to get them the treatment they need. But again, there are as many as 60,000 kids who could be a part of the OhioRISE program.